Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Red Hat Sync on the OpenShift operator. I've got a few items in the agenda that we can discuss, and of course, anything else on folks' mind. The very first one was the decision about using the Helm SDK. We reached, I believe, a decision on it to move forward. Jason, could you give us just a quick synopsis of that issue and the next steps?
So the rundown for everybody who hasn't been here prior, essentially we have a large amount of work already in place for Helm, and this is where we're getting developers onboarded to actually commit to actually doing the cloud native work as well. In an effort to try and reduce the number of places where we have to have people come in and add pieces or learn how to add pieces, we would like to make use of that Helm work, noting that we would replace all instances of other operator based providers with the ones that we have available as a part of OpenShift. We did do the experiments with this early on, and Edmund did some checking in on how it would work, and we did notice that we do have some refinements to do. But after digging through what we've got in place, how the framework works, how the Helm code base itself works, their SDK, as well as looking at some of the concerns that were raised during the initial investigation of using that work, we still believe that it's viable to continue down the path of attempting to use this as opposed to straight independent generators within the Go code base itself. There will be an amount of logic that is required to understand how the application works, and we're going to face that no matter what. The first thing that we need to address is not having the template called every single time. As far as DJ and I can tell, the biggest issue there is just actually stashing the output instead of calling it repeatedly as an idempotent function. So instead, we would generate it once based on the checksum of the CRD, and then stash that and only regenerate it if we actually needed to notice a change. The second thing is one of the things that we noticed is the methodology for actually having the idempotence now is effectively repeatedly calling the same function that results in the same output being generated. That's essentially a stateless behavior, and it does function and it's relatively performant, but it's not something that is a hard need as far as we can tell in design wise. The largest change to the existing code base would effectively be replacement of all the skeleton functions, the generators under GitLab utils, because we wouldn't need to use a generator because we'd have all of that already. The last concern and the largest concern that we've noticed is understanding who generated a change and how often those change notifications would come around, and making sure that when we are doing a reconcile loop, that another reconcile loop doesn't interrupt us and result in us not knowing that, oh, that's something we're doing in this other loop. Uh, Going through everything, we don't believe that should be a case because it looks like it's a FIFO stack in terms of how this is handled. So barring us having to wait for something to get fully populated and the cycle expanding, uh, this shouldn't be something we run into, but there are ways to mitigate this, whether it's with annotations or many other methods.
Thanks, Jason. I've tried to capture some of what you called out as kind of the next steps, but certainly that could use some polish. I wanted to just straight up, it feels like we've reached a decision. Now we're sort of planning what the next steps are. It'd be great to get that firmed up so that we can, get the next set of work scheduled.
Right. Um, they primarily that is reviewed in some detail in the comment that's actually posted. We can add extensive detail from the discussion if it's needed. Um, Obviously, the question would be if there is any pushback or concerns with the way that DJ and I see things, because it's always worth an extra set of eyes.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand everything. So are we affirmative that we are moving forward, switching to Helm, or are we still trying to experiment and implement what we think is possible?
We are at this point beyond the experimentation. We're going, what we want to do is for the GitLab portion of the GitLab operator, just that one, we're not talking about GitLab runner, is to implement the Helm SDK templating that we've done as an experiment until this point. We want to refine that to the position where we can fully replace the existing generators.
Okay, sounds good. So based on that, it would be okay for me to assume that at this point I should stop doing any work as far as the uh, managing of the GitLab application is concerned from the operator's perspective, and only work on the runner side because that is going to be replaced.
I won't say don't do any work, but what I would say is that we should focus right now on the GitLab runner from your side and the existing code base patterns. They have a faster turnaround on MVC and market products, so we want to make sure we have that out the door on that deadline. When it comes to the application work, there is a number of components that you're working on now that are state specific, specifically OpenShift and the operator and how we actually consume other providers that are still viable things to be working on. The only real difference is going to be things like where we use GitLab utils to generate the service accounts. Instead of calling to the function, we would call into the object to just give me the service account for this name. So most of it would be drop and replace, but I wouldn't go too deep into trying to replicate additional features that have been coming along because we're losing parity as it is. So we'll need to try and just take a gap, get this fully implemented, and then regain all that we have because now we don't have to have parity between two projects.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity. I think we'll need to be more specific at some point. We may not be able to do that because it definitely wouldn't benefit us for me to work on something that I think or I presume would be useful, and then we don't end up using it. But for the most part, I think what I'm getting is for this point on, I'll focus on the runner side until I get specific issues that I need to address on the GitLab application side. And beyond that, I am available for consultation as far as the GitLab application is concerned. Is that fair? Did I have a good understanding of the conversation?
Yep, I think that sounds about right. We know that the runner, there's demand for it. So that's certainly not going to be wasted. And as you mentioned, it's not directly tied to the Helm work. So I don't think any of it would be affected by the decision to use the Helm SDK in the runner itself.
What else is there, like macro level from is there to do on the GitLab side? So there's the largely consuming some CRD, piping that into the Helm chart. That's largely work that I imagine can be done. There's using the Helm chart to template out and then write, which I think we're something we're changing. There is the work to do the securitization / monitoring of the objects, which might also be different. Is those like the three main pieces?
There is the regards to how we're doing the constraining within the namespace through the service accounts. That particular piece of work, which with understanding how things are operating and doing the ensuring through admin, I still don't fully understand how that behaves, and we have that as another item. Some of the securing work can still be worked on, but the the step between what are the properties from the CRD and what is the object I'm trying to enforce, that's where the Helm SDK comes into play.
Yeah, it's the deployment and the ongoing validation of, I imagine, the security features. Cool. On the runner side, are we like Darren and Evan? Do you know where we're at there? Like, are we? I think we're going to have a beta by 13.7. How do we?
Yeah, I hope we. Yeah, Josh, I hear you. Well, I hope we have to be there by 13.7. We actually assigned on the engineering team side. We actually assigned to one of our engineers to start working it right now. We think we should have most of the work wrapped by 13.7. The one thing we haven't done, we haven't synced up with Edmund's team in a while. So that's one thing we probably do need to sync up as we get going. But yeah, hopefully we get everything knocked out by 13.7.
Okay. So is there, I guess, work for Evan and Darren to do towards drive towards like the initial GA offering here? Or I try to make sure we have.
Yeah. So from the runner perspective, so the operator version as it exists today only supports deploying and managing the GitLab runner. So since the initial launch, we've seen a lot of interest in the operator, and we've received bug requests and fixed those and feature requests. So I think the runner is at a better position because we also have user input at this point already. There are stuff that are pending. I believe we have MRs, and the runner image that is being deployed is not an official image. So those are issues that we need to resolve. But I think we have more data on the runner side. We know there's interest. We know what users want, and we've added that functionality for the most part.
Okay.
Sorry, Edmund, just to follow up on that, I just linked in the channel the issue for the work that we defined for the runner, the core work to get us to the beta, if you will, for 13.7. So we should all take a look at that, especially the implementation task section, to make sure we've covered everything that we have to do on the runner side. You don't have to do it in this call, obviously, but it's just you can comment on it later on after, and so on.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and review it and put any comments if I notice anything is missing. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry for sort of steering this up. I just trying to go off the conversation here. We're making sure that we're leveraging you to the degree that we can, Evan. We are trying to move as fast as we possibly can on OpenShift, and so I want to make sure that we're obviously making the most of your offer to help here, and we appreciate it. And so I want to make sure that we, sort of don't have you waiting for things to work on because of a change in sort of some of the direction on the GitLab side of things towards the Helm chart. And as far as like talent's work, like you mentioned the demand. So what we see the demand for is number one by far is the runner operator from what we hear from our customers and our field teams. So that is by far the most important to get out there. Number two, we're getting a fair number of questions on the security features and other code quality features that we run. A part of auto DevOps. It's a bit of a separate thing, not related to the operator. And then behind that is the GitLab instance. So that can hopefully give some feedback on what we're hearing as far as the prioritization and demand from our side.
Cool. And there has been some confusion as far as the operator is concerned, which I think with the discussion that we're having now is a great opportunity to bring this up. So the work to deploy the GitLab application was added into the runner that was deployed initially. So it was going to manage both. Is it beneficial to have one operator to manage both, or should we split it? And I don't know whether it might be wise to split, especially given that the approach to manage the resources is going to be different. It's something to think about, but just wanted to throw it out there and see what people are thinking about.
At least from my team's perspective, the fact that we have one product technically deploying to has always been a little confusing. We are not necessarily against splitting it. We're not exactly against keeping them together either. So we can go either route, but we should be keenly aware that there's two completely separate products actually being deployed that make up the entirety of our ecosystem for GitLab. But the sheer fact is that Runner is technically a separate component that is released separately and managed by another team.
Yeah, maybe we should open an issue on this and do async. I think it's something we have resolved probably pretty soon here. That sound good?
Hey, Joshua and team, this is Matt Mariani from the Red Hat BD side. In regards to demand, I admittedly have been following through folks in the team. When I hear about opportunities in the Red Hat side of the field, I am hearing requests for server certification coming up. So I would definitely get the sense there's initial demand with Runner. I guess I just wanted to test the statement on demand, if that needs to be refreshed. I would also throw out work with IBM on like the marketplace side, and that's been an area I think of another route to market that they've been kind of discussing with us and has been in the mix with Vic, and to call out that the server cert may be a dependency in that train as well. So I'm not looking to dispute the statement, but definitely want to just test and see if we feel that the input on the demand for the server certs kind of current with respect to some of those things.
Yeah, I can provide a little more color there, perhaps, and that might help. And then maybe we can have a separate call if necessary between us two, and we can better discuss some of these items. But we have a fair amount of opportunities and existing customers that we are tracking that want OpenShift. It's a sizable chunk of revenue between those two pieces of between both existing and new customers, new opportunities rather. And it's hard to know for sure, but in talking with them, of that batch of folks, like 50-50, maybe a little bit more than that, is looking for Runner first. Existing customers already are managing GitLab in some way, shape, or form. Some of them want to move it into OpenShift. And their most pressing need is having a Runner so they can deploy their software more easily into OpenShift. And for net new customers, it's similar. If they have to run a VM or two outside of OpenShift, they can. It's not as desirable if they wanted to run the whole thing OpenShift, but they're again, the most pressing item is having the Runner there in their cluster so they can deploy locally from there without having to connect to externally. So that's the general pattern we're seeing here. Folks do want the server. We are working hard to deliver on it. But from a demand point of view, it's been relatively clear from the field teams that the Runner is number one, that something that we're hearing from that demand. Now IBM and some other opportunities may be a bit different, but that's largely what we're hearing from our field.
Thank you.
Yeah. Matt, my apologies. I haven't heard this term before, the server cert.
Oh, I'm sorry. The certification the operator certification we're talking about here for the server instance,
Okay.
as opposed to the Runner. Apologies if I'm misusing terms there. The full GitLab offering versus the Runner.
Okay. Yeah, it's not a matter of misusing terms. I just didn't know what that particular set of them meant. It happens.
Oh, that's probably on me. I apologize.
So, but you have separate teams, aside from I've been working on these things, and so we're full steam ahead on both paths. But yeah.
Any more discussion on the Runner? I think
we're okay. My main question was just making sure that we found, that we're making the best use that we can of admin's time and and helping us to accelerate either one of these projects to delivery as much as we can. It sounds like the runner is a good place to work and draw that to completion, at least for the first iteration, and then perhaps we can circle back and address some of the other pieces. And for the server side of things, seems reasonable to me. But Evan, if you ever get stuck or looking for things, please holler. I'm sure we can use the help. So
Don't worry, we can find something.
Sounds good.
Cool. I think that takes us to item 3. And Gerard, give us a quick synopsis of the GitLab versions and the operator version situation.
All right. So basically, I started looking at this a little bit and trying to figure out how we should handle this. And I think the way, and again, this is going to may change a bit if we decide to split the runner and application into 2 separate operators, of course. But initially, what I was looking at is I think it would be highly desirable to get the operator version number the same as the GitLab release. That way, it's less confusion for the customers as they start to use the operator. But until that point, I don't see why we, especially as we're mostly developing the runner, keep just a simple semantic version of 1.0 and moving forward until the operator comes up to parity of being able to manage the runner, and then we just bump that version number up to the release of GitLab at that point. Another piece of that is that, as I discussed in the comment, basically that we should use the operator and handle just the number of supported releases. So basically 3 releases from current in the operator. That would help simplify the operator code. It also allows us to help remove cruft that accumulates over time and keep the operator a little more healthy. So those are my thoughts. I haven't seen any significant discussion or opposition to that. So I'll leave it at there unless someone has other thoughts at this point.
There is some concern about trying to push quickly into the matched versions until we can get a full grip on everything in terms of what components need to roll and the changes and how to implement them. We will hopefully not run into the number of problems that we did when it comes to the runner itself being a less complex total piece, which is good. Should we continue to keep the operator together, or operators together, I should say, that we're definitely going to run into a little bit of a hiccup while we deal with the fact that we don't necessarily have the same contents in feature parity between the omnibus and the operator itself. It's one of the distinct reasons why we don't have version lock between the charts and the rest of the CNG and actually how the omnibus versions directly with the GitLab code base. It's because we don't have feature parity. So until we're 100% sure that we're up to feature parity, we can maintain that, we may actually have pushback from the release cycle until we can actually say that, yeah, this is going to be in by then, and we're not going to lag behind.
By the release cycle, in parity, do you mean feature parity, like pages and things like that, or?
Yeah.
Okay. I personally, we can keep this going, maybe in the issue, but personally, I'm less concerned about that. I think when I was discussing previously, I was more concerned about sort of breaking changes outside of our normal May release cycle for the application, if we had to do them.
That's the second big one right there, is because the cloud native landscape, whether it's in OpenShift or Kubernetes, I can talk today, Kubernetes is changing so rapidly. There are times when we have to make large shifts in application. For example, we've got upcoming Italy cluster, and that's a big change in the way the chart actually will operate if that mode is flagged. We may not be able to necessarily wait for a major revision change. Like 14.0 is 6 months from now. We may not have the ability to wait 6 months to implement something. But I think for now, saying that at least in the beginning, that we specifically maintain the version of operability based on the release that we were at the time of that pre 1.0 makes sense. Let's not fight to have 3, 4, 6 versions that are capable of being in play and then upgraded through until such time as we're actually prepared to do that.
Yeah, that makes
And I
sense.
think in my view, initially, I mean, we're really hitting the runner with the operator today. And I think initially, my view of it is that we just allow the operator and keep just the current release of the runner. In other words, don't try to do 6 releases of the runner in the operator today. Just keep that one version and keep the current version that's been released up. So that was my thought.
What does the upgrade cycle look like then, if it only supports one version?
Well, at that point, it would be just, would it not be the same as just upgrading from an old version to the current version? So you upgrade the operator and the operator would then go and upgrade the runner?
I imagine you probably want the runner, the version definition in the CRD for the runner is my guess, in the CR. So that way it's,
Yeah, I would think so.
yeah.
Yep.
The nature of the runner being a less complex application, it doesn't have 19 components, it's got one. So versioning it is much simpler, where you can actually say, I want 13.5 and I want to be able to deploy one that's 13.4. And as long as we have the containers in the registries, then you'd be able to do that to a degree. Now, that being said, I defer to the operator framework experts we have on the call.
So what question particularly are we trying to answer? I'm a little lost, sorry.
Fine. From the aspect of the runner, just the runner component of GitLab operator.
Okay.
We're talking about the handling of the versions of the GitLab runner and the operator itself. How would we best align the version of the GitLab runner as deployed by the operator?
Yeah. So yeah, that becomes an interesting question. I think I'll give 2 options. I'll give 2 options here. One being with with one operator managing the 2 resources and us having separate operators. I think the approach that Gerard brought up makes sense, in that we have the operator version matching the resources or the version of resources that it's deploying, so that when somebody sees I have operator version 13.6, they know this will deploy, let's say, Rana or GitLab application server version 13.6, and maybe 2 versions behind. I think emulating a similar approach would make sense. But thinking of it, I want to say, what comes to mind is the version of the GitLab application and the version of GitLab Runner do not always match. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So with that being the case, it makes for an interesting case, especially if they're going to be combined. But if we decide that we'll have separate operators for the 2, then for the runner side, we can always assume that, we can always choose that the operator version will also deploy, or operator version X will deploy a runner version X. So there would be that parity. So I think that makes sense. For the current operator that's in place, of course, we don't have that. And the other thing that was just mentioned, for the runner side, I don't believe it's necessary to be able to support multiple versions. maybe if somebody can has more information, you can let me know. But I do see, yeah, I think I'm getting a nod to mean that one version makes sense. But I was going to say, I do see edge cases whereby if there's a major architectural change and it disrupts the behavior of somebody running the operator, they may want to roll back to a previous version. So in that scenario, I think just being able to support two would make sense, so that people can roll back in that weird situation or that one-off situation. But beyond that, I think it just makes sense to be able to support one version.
Do you typically see like a version tag in the CRs for the operator, or is it just dependent on the operator version that's deployed, as far as and it just deploys whatever version it wants of the
so
application?
When you say CR tag, are we talking of for instance, in this case, if we have a GitLab runner operator, so our custom resource would be the runner, right?
Yeah.
So we do see cases where people want to be able to override the version. In the case of the runner, I did not give people the option to be able to override the tag of the image, or to be able to give an alternate image. And that's something that people would do sometimes. And the reason for that is, in the case of OpenShift, and the runner specifically, I knew that the image we were using in OpenShift was modified specifically to run on OpenShift. So we did not need any UID. So if somebody was to replace that image with something else, then the runner would break, or the runner would not deploy successfully. So for that reason, I did not give users the ability to do that. But I've seen situations where people have given the user the ability to do that. And in some cases, depending on the scenario, it may mean that you have to account for maybe change in behavior, but in most cases, it's just straightforward. It's just a simple, a different image, but the behavior is going to be the same.
Is there a best practice that's defined, like operator framework here, or just up to whoever wants to implement this stuff?
I would say that depends on the application. Of course, you want to give the user more or ability to override, or more flexibility. And different communities or different projects choose different approaches. There are people who decide that I do not want to give the user the ability to shoot themselves on the foot. And any company that is going to offer some level of support tend to be more stringent as far as what leverage or how much freedom they give the user. Because if the user goes too far in one side, either very customized in one direction or the other, they may not be able to get in and fix quickly. So in that case, you want to restrict the options or what variables the user can do. And you also do that with stability and best practices in mind. So you come from a perspective of a bias, knowing that this is the best way to deploy it, and this is what I'll support, and I may give you a few other options.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks. That's great. We can probably move on, and we're running out of time here. So appreciate the feedback, though. That's great.
That rings a bell, Josh, because we've had customers deploy the Kubernetes chart and then specify GitLab version. And even though we document it left and right, don't use this unless you're a developer, they set it to like 3 revisions back, and then the chart doesn't know what to do. So I completely see where Edmund is coming from, especially from the support side, where our answer has been, yeah, take that value out and just upgrade. You'll be fine. But if you do that in OpenShift and it's your operator that's doing that, reading the logs and going, oh, well, that's not exactly a fun support call.
Cool. I have to hop real fast, but thanks everyone. And if anything, I open up the issue for the single or split operators, and so I'll paste it into the docs here in a second.
Sounds good. I think that takes us to the next item. I saw some comments from a couple of weeks ago on the NUID stuff. Thought maybe we could just have a quick synopsis summary of kind of what's there and what we're planning next. I saw Edmund's comment in particular. It says we would need to review each container with specified user and determine if it's necessary to begin with. And I guess this is in the runner image.
Yeah, I've not had any time to address this due to competing priorities. That's entirely possible. Edmund has had the same problem.
Gotcha. We can table it till next time. It was one of them that's scheduled for this release. And so I wanted to just kind of keep pushing it along, but if there's no status, we'll save it for next time.
Yeah, I think there isn't new information as far as that is concerned. There is some stuff that I was thinking of that we can talk about later. So I think we can just move forward.
You can just collect that into the issue. We can discuss there and bring any further items up in the next sync as well.
Sounds good. That takes us back to Gerard on the registry image submission.
All right, so last Friday, there was a call between us and Red Hat on the working through the image submission certification processes. A lot of good information. I do have the call recorded in the notes, they're referenced here. So if you're really interested, I was hoping that the call would be serve as a training for anybody else that needed to do some of this, and it's probably not quite to that level, but it does have some good information. During that call, we identified that it looks like there's at least 2 GitLab company IDs or whatever. And it looks like I'm the only one that's not in that company that shows the products and the images and so forth. So I think that's still trying to get resolved. I checked a little bit ago and it's still that case. Nothing's moved on it for me. Another thing that came up because we're asking about is the API that's available. That I've looked at the API. It does look like it'll be sufficient enough to allow us to integrate the image submission and certification processes into RCI. We will have to poll. It doesn't look like there's a webhook to call back, let us know the results are ready. So we'll just have to poll occasionally to look for results and then take action on that. I think that's about it for that.
And Jared, just to close the loop, and I was talking with Pete about this as well. I am tracking the situation with your accounts, and I had sent a ping out to Charles on our end, who's taken point on that. As he hasn't gotten back to me just yet, but okay. Once he does, I'll be sure. I'll just hit you up on Slack if that works.
That works for me.
Cool.
Great, thank you.
So the metadata, we did the rescan, and that didn't seem to change anything. What's the next steps on that?
So, Jared, do you want to take that, or you want me to?
I think you had a better handle on that. You seem to understand it better, so why don't you go ahead and take it?
Sure. Let me just pull up my notes real quick on that. So, it's my understanding that the issue here is. Let me just. No. That's it. Okay, cool. Sorry, just pulling this up. So it looks like there's an issue with the, how are they calling it? So there's
there was a problem with the certification of the latest push, if I remember correctly.
So I'm not sure it's that. So what Charles had said was he discovered that the product which contains the runner and runner operator projects is not published. And so that's why it's not showing up. And so apparently there's some missing information that needs to be added in order to publish. And he says he pasted a screenshot below showing the missing information there. I'm not, let's see. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see from the screenshot.
Yeah, I think just going back to that comment, if I recall that conversation properly, I think that was the initial perception. But once we got into the project, we found that it had been published, or both the metadata and the images had been published. but there was a release. So we currently have two versions of the operator, and that's the operator that's deploying the run at this point. So we have 0111 and 0112. There had been an attempt to publish 0113 that failed, and it was just left in failed status. So during that call, there was an attempt made to try and republish that, or to run a scan on that to see if that fixes the issue. But if I just take us back to that, early on in the call, we noticed when Charles was walking us through the issue, he was able to pull up the operator and it came up okay. And we were like, it's fixed. Then later on in the call, it disappeared. So it seems like there's something very sporadic that we haven't really been able to.
Well, I don't
Yeah,
think
so
it.
that was
go ahead.
the difference there was he was looking at the container images. It came up every time at the container images, but then when you did a search specifically on the operators, it wouldn't show up there.
Okay. Yeah, then I basically missed that, but yeah, thanks for the clarification.
So I'm wondering if it's just kind of a categorization problem. I mean, is there some label or tag that it's not being, that's not allowing it to come up for an operator search where it comes up as a container still?
So when submitting the images, we have a different process to submit the operator and to submit the other application containers. So I think from that perspective, they should be different, but certainly there is stuff for us to go back and figure out. Just seems to be a red herring, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Anything else on the registry image for submission? And we're right up almost at the time. Edmund, you had the next two items here.
Okay, so for the next item, I just wanted to follow up. During, I think it was our last meeting, there was a discussion of potentially being an architectural change, which would mean either we wouldn't need the GitLab secured apps, or so we were having a discussion between the GitLab secured apps and GitLab managed app namespaces, and trying to figure out whether we would need them. So I just wanted to have a follow-up to see whether there was any information on that was gathered. Did I freeze?
No.
No.
We all heard you. I'm just not sure there's a response.
Okay, all right. I rebooted my system right before the meeting, and I've noticed my mouse is dragging, so I just wasn't sure whether my system hung. But okay, so let's segue into the next thing. If something else comes up, we can always revisit. The next thing is, I thought it might be interesting or a good opportunity for us to review the scope of the operator as it stands, and have a little bit of a discussion of how OLM would handle that. So for the version of the operator that's currently deployed, and this is specific to Rana, we have it segmented, or we have it namespace scoped, meaning the operator would only watch requests for Rana instances within a single namespace. And that means if we have, let's say, 10 different departments or different organizations sharing the same cluster, each of them could have their own operator running within the own namespace, and they wouldn't affect each other. So with that being the case, wanted to float the idea of, if we have a cluster scoped operator, for instance, in the case of GitLab, if we decide to have a cluster scoped, the ideal situation would be that you can deploy a GitLab instance in any namespace and the operator would handle that. And in an ideal situation, you should only have one instance of the operator in the cluster because it will be responding to requests throughout the cluster. So I think it's an ideal situation for us to evaluate what users may need. If it's likely that they would need to be able to deploy multiple GitLab instances within the cluster, then we think about that now. And number two, if we are able, so number two, that goes also to security. If we working, or if we expect people who are security conscious to use the operator, being namespaced would be more comforting than having an operator or an application that has access to the entire cluster. Because for the operator to be able to deploy to any namespace in the cluster, then it would need to have cluster roles versus roles, which are restricted to a single namespace. So that was, yeah, those were my thoughts as far as this is concerned, and just wanted to share that and see what you guys think.
So from the application standpoint, we did investigate this actually in the past with our Helm work in our early KubeBuilder based, I think it was KubeBuilder based operator, and looking into the question of whether we would do one instance of that operator or we would do one with namespace and actually scoping farther through API labels. And we effectively decided that if you want to be able to run side by side, if you have an operator that is version locked to the application, it's extremely hard to deploy multiple versions of the application. For example, a pre-staging and production, if you have only one instance with the global scope. So you'd either have to do a fancy trick with scoping in terms of what the API subgroups are, or you have to just have them individually namespaced. We effectively just came down and said, let's namespace it for now, but we'll deal with who owns what in terms of what we're doing in the old-fashioned operator behaviors by doing, well, let's just leave it as janky things. The biggest problem is you can't deploy more than one if you have a singleton operator that is cluster scoped.
You cannot deploy multiple what? GitLab instances?
Multiple versions of GitLab. So let's say that you had operator 13.5 and operator 13.6 came out and you wanted to do a test upgrade without actually affecting your production. The only way to do that would be to actually upgrade the operator and pray, or have a second cluster to be able to test it on.
Okay, yeah.
Part of it that I'm really curious about in terms of when we talk to customers, do we find that they typically have separate clusters for production and non-production, or are they running everything inside of one large cluster?
Cluster.
Well, I'll tell you, coming from working on Kubernetes outside of development and operating it at other companies, there would typically be multiple clusters. Almost everybody tends to have a stage or a test cluster for doing quick testing and so forth. But I'm not going to say everybody does it that way, but I would say most people out there will.
Yeah, that would be my expectation, because that allows you to actually I could upgrade Kubernetes versions, right, independently of the application itself, and have a little more stable progress instead of like just changing Kubernetes in my production environment and impacting all
crossing the fingers and hoping it all works.
Yeah, because since all of the instances would be, or environments would be impacted.
And I think that's when the way you said it there, that's the thing that comes across and plays to Edmund's question, is if we namespace it, it's not hard to actually deploy multiple instances. They just have to be in different namespaces. If we put a singleton in place on the cluster itself, we have to play those subgrouping tricks, which function, but they work funny things in your head. The easiest way to be able to deploy more than one instance and to be able to individually control the versions of those instances, whether it's an upgrade path or just teams on different cycles, is to have them individually namespaced, in my opinion. Because future case, if we get to the point where we say, you know, I only ever want to have one instance of this thing running, can I have a cluster scoped version? It's easier for us to go from namespace to clustered than clustered to namespaced.
All right. Yeah, I think that was a discussion that I thought was ideal to have, so that we have a clear idea of what you need. And we can have an issue open so that if we want to get user input, we get it. But yeah. I think I'm done with the topic I had.
Evan, quick question. This thought on your operator scope, do you have that in an issue today? Because I've also got a thought or two running in my head. I wouldn't mind putting down in the issue.
No, I don't have anything. I just thought about it today when I was looking at what we need to go through, and that came up. But yeah, we can have an issue open.
Yeah, if you can get an issue, I'll put some comments in there too, because I see value both ways, and I'm not sure they're mutually exclusive either. But let me put that in documentation so other people can either shoot me and say, no, you're being stupid, or hey, that's a okay idea. I don't know which it will be.
All right, sounds good.
And if you get free time, Gerard, feel free to open a skeleton for that.
I may try to. So if I do get a chance to get it open, I'll tag in the issue admin so you know it's been there, so you don't duplicate.
Okay, sounds good.
Right. Phil, it looks like you have the last item.
Yep. So I'll go quick, be respectful of y'all's time here. So the NFR licenses, so you can set up your own cluster environments. I was just wondering, was anyone able to access the page for requesting those? So that was an action item that I'd followed up with Vic on. I'm not sure where things are with that.
Dustin, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
No, that's fine. I can fill in with whatever.
Okay. I know I did that months ago when I first started looking a little bit at OpenShift. But I don't remember the exact process. I remember submitting it, and then like a couple hours or maybe even minutes later, I got an email back saying they're available or something other, and that's about all I've ever seen.
Okay.
Gotcha. I believe Dustin, he's not here this week, but I believe he got all the way through the process and got to the point where he was actually able to stand up a working cluster.
Okay, cool.
And so what we were hoping to do is get him all the way through the process so that we can get it, defined in steps, and then have other folks on the team, essentially go through the same process. So okay. Gerard, maybe between now and the next time we meet, maybe you can step through and make sure you got the license, the creds, resources that you need to do it.
Okay.
Thanks for following up, though. That's definitely one that we wanted to make sure we had everything we needed.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I think that's a wrap for today, everyone. Thanks for everybody's time. There's some good notes here. I'll record this and add a link to the recording in the document if folks want to go back later. And then there's a few folks on my team that are in alternate time zones that'll watch it as well. Have a good one. See you next time.
All right.
Thanks.
Good on. See ya.
Okay.
Good week.